Hello there, Dave here, and what you're about to listen to is a preview of the full spoiler discussion about the Elden Ring DLC Shadow of the Erdtree. There was an over 2-hour discussion about this expansion. There's so much going on, and the public feed is going to have about half of that episode. So in this preview, you'll be able to hear our thoughts about the story, the level and world design, the art direction, the music, lots of other cool stuff. And then in the back half, which is available exclusively over at patreon.com/realdavejackson, that is where we will talk about our favorite boss fights. We will talk about some of the enemy designs, the builds that we used, and much more. So if that sounds interesting to you, once again, that is available over at patreon.com/realdavejackson for all patrons starting at $2 per month. If you'd like to sign up and hear the entire episode, it's a great way to support the show as well. You'll get a bunch of other treats. But that is enough advertising for now, so let's just enjoy this preview of the Tales from the Backlog episode about Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Tales from the Backlog VIP. This is a bonus episode for the patrons. A thank you for your support. It's been a while since we had a straight-up bonus episode for all patrons, I think. So we can bask in the air of sweet, sweet exclusivity today as we do this episode about the Elden Ring DLC, but I'm not here by myself. I have a guest with me today, a returning guest, Kindly Charlie, Tender Charlie, as they call him in the Shadow realm. Welcome back to the show, Charlie Young.
Thanks, Dave. Honored to be back for this one. This is a big one, I feel like. So, yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are talking about Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. And so if for people who are not in the know, this is the 2024 expansion to From Software's 2022 base game of Elden Ring. And good to have you on the show specifically, Charlie, because I know that, number one, you are relatively new to From Software in the grand scheme of things, but you are not new to Elden Ring in particular. You have played Elden Ring much more than I have. So I'm going to really appreciate your perspective, I think, on a lot of this stuff as, like I said, a relative newbie to FromSoft, but like an Elden Ring master as far as our community goes.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that. The FromSoft universe is like really intriguing to me, and I've tried to poke at it in a lot of different places and haven't found my way in to all of them yet, although I'm still trying. But yeah, Elden Ring I've really resonated with for some reason.
Yeah, we'll dive into that just here in a second. I do want to give a couple of things before we get to that. First of all, spoiler policy for this episode. I kind of figure that anyone listening to this has already played Elden Ring. This would be a really weird place to jump into both the game and the discussion about Elden Ring as a greater work of art. So this is going to be a full spoiler discussion. I'm not going to try to spoil things right away, but we are going to talk about the story, and we are going to talk about, the story behind the final boss, because was a bit of a surprise to me. So full spoilers for this episode, just getting that out front. We're not doing a no spoiler breakdown like a regular Tales from the Backlog episode. We're also not going to explain the mechanics of how Elden Ring works, just because, number one, again, this is the DLC. If you're here, you know how it works. And also, I did 4 episodes back in, I think it was July 2022, about Elden Ring. So I have had this conversation before. I don't need to explain it again. There are things that have changed, though. We will get into that for sure. So, stats. I played this on PS5. It took me 45 hours to get through the DLC. I was not completionist, but I did explore every piece of land that I found. There are some optional bosses that I missed, but I did go to all of the locations. 45 hours, though, not a small DLC. How long would you say it took you your first time through it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I was 50 hours on my first time through. Like you said, like not 100%ing it, but trying as casually as possible to 100% it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Trying to turn over every rock that I could organically. And then I did do a second playthrough where I was a little more streamlined, trying to hit all the major bosses, but not interested in, again, turning over every rock because I'd already been down that path. And then so the second run through the DLC was about 19 hours still just doing kind of like not necessarily critical path, not just like 3 bosses and you're out, but all the major bosses still took 19 hours.
Yeah. So kind of like the base game, I guess, like the second run through is a bit of a victory lap, but it still seems like that maybe the challenge is higher or there's more mandatory stuff or something like that. Because I know that like running a new game plus through the base game can be like 5 hours if you just kind of beeline through it.
Yeah, I just actually did my first New Game Plus. I was like, I've done all this Elden Ring. I've never done New Game Plus. I've always just started new characters. I've done 8 complete runs of the base game. But so I decided, I've done the DLC. Why don't I take my DLC character through a New Game Plus run and just see how much ass I can kick? And it was 4 hours to hit all the major bosses, except like I didn't hit Rykard. I didn't hit the ancient dragons, but pretty much everything else ticked off the list. It was like a list of like 20 bosses. It was about 4 hours. So
Jesus. Yeah. So you went to see how much ass could be kicked, and I think you kicked quite a bit of ass if that's all it took. I have seen people take these DLC characters because, like, we'll talk about the new progression system, but you do gain a ton of levels. Like, I think I gained 35 levels or something like that in the DLC with my character. So just, those stats increasing, you're going to go fuck up some of those early game bosses for sure.
Yeah, my first DLC character, I entered at like level 140 or something and came out like 205, 206.
Yeah.
And the second one was one of my like long plays where I had done 120 hours in the base game. So that was already like 170 something. Also my faster run, so I did less stuff, but I still came out around 205, 206. So yeah, you get so many runes from these bosses because of how challenging they are. And so it's inevitable that you're gonna come out just, as jacked as you can.
Yeah, I went into the DLC at level 175 or something like that, and I think I finished at 208. So a lot of levels gained, a lot of runes that you get, like you said. Let's not bury the lead too much here. Let's talk about how we feel about this DLC. I'll kick to you first. Obviously, you've now played it one complete run, one kind of like boss rush run through it. How did you feel about this?
This game is great, man. It's
Yeah.
if you like Elden Ring, it's more of Elden Ring, but in a lot of ways better, right? I mean, like kind of it distills a lot of the original game down. It feels a little more focused. The things that they do with exploration are just like Elden Ring felt really satisfying with exploration, and the DLC kind of kicks that up to 11, I would say.
Yeah.
So many of the discussions we've had in the Discord as the community has been playing have just been, I'm racking my brain trying to get to this one spot in the map that I can see, but everything I do can't get me there. Mm-hmm. And like the number of times that there's a satisfying solution to that, it just keeps refreshing your interest for exploration. And it's often rewarded mechanically too, right? So yeah. I don't know, there's just, they're figuring out how to like reward you on so many levels, mechanically, story, visually, just like that moment you feel like a genius when you solve a puzzle, like all of those things kind of stacked up together. So I love it, man.
Yeah, me too. This is so I just beat this yesterday, so I don't want like recency bias to like make this like a full-throated, this is my game of the year, like set in stone, but it will probably be my favorite thing that I play this year. And it was interesting because I had not played Elden Ring since I beat it back in like April or May of 22. I didn't really touch Elden Ring in the last 2 years. And I had kind of wondered, because in my Elden Ring month from July of 22, I had said that this is one of my favorite games ever. I think it is one of the best games ever made. And then as that kind of like fades back into history, I started to think, and like I hear more criticism about Elden Ring coming out, and I start to think, well, they kind of have a point. It's not perfect. We knew this, but there are things about it that are not great. So is this actually one of the best games ever made? And then this DLC drops, and I get back in and I start to experience new Elden Ring content again. And I'm like, yes, this is one of the best games ever made. This, like, the DLC blew me away. I was worried about the difficulty level because I hate the Dark Souls 3 DLC, and that was the last DLC that we got from Software, because there's no DLC for Sekiro. So I was worried, and then like I started playing this and I was like, oh no, they're really just like flexing all their strongest muscles with this DLC. Like, the difficulty we'll talk about, I think they found a pretty good solution for introducing challenge, but also like rewarding you for exploring. And that's my favorite thing about From Software's games, is exploring the levels, and then now in Elden Ring, exploring this open world that they created. And that stuff, like you talked about, especially with the way that this map is levels stacked on top of each other with these twisting paths, and like you see a place that's not that far as the bird flies, but you have to figure out how to get there. And those moments where you're like, you go into a cave and you come out the other side and you're like, holy shit, I'm in that place. I couldn't get to it earlier. Now I'm here. All of those moments. This is like I said, this is them working to their biggest strengths. And we'll talk about the difficulty. There's some stuff that I don't love there, but like those couple of bosses that I fought that were like, hey, this kind of sucks, I'm not having a great time here. Those are not even close to enough to knock this game down, because the things it does well, and especially in this DLC, the things this DLC does well are so fucking good that I can't, I mean, like they would have had to have made like 15 more hate fuck bosses to ever make me like this game less.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There are definitely, like you say, that kind of retrospective on Elden Ring and trying to figure out, is it as good as we feel like we remember in the moment? There are tons of things about it that frustrate me. But, I still have fun pretty much every time I pick it up. Like, it's part of the process. Some of it is bullshit. Let's be clear. Like, but it's just part of the process. And so the DLC is no different. Like you're saying, there are some things where I'm like, oh boy, they really could have taken this boss in a different direction or dialed this thing a little bit differently. I think there are some balancing issues, and we'll get into like, using all of the game's tools. I think that there's a way to have fun and feel satisfied with pretty much every boss in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, even if it doesn't feel balanced to that kind of like hardcore, I'm going to play without any, hand holding, it's still possible, and it still feels satisfying when you do it. It almost feels like a fuck you to the devs. It's like, oh yeah, I did it anyway, that kind of thing, which, I think there's always some of that in this type of, the challenges that are presented in this type of game.
Yeah, for sure. Let's walk it back before we get into our kind of dive on what's new and what's notable in this DLC. We had mentioned before that Elden Ring is the first From Software game that you really clicked with, and I did a whole episode back in that Elden Ring month in July 22 about people who had the same experience that you did, because there are a lot of people who are like, I didn't get on with Dark Souls, I didn't like Bloodborne, I couldn't play Sekiro, Elden Ring was the one that clicked. And so was Elden Ring the first one that you tried, or was it the first one that really hit for you? And why do you think that was the case?
Yeah, so it was the first one that I tried. So
okay.
that part of it's easy. However, like regardless of that, I have tried others since then and not found them as easy to get into.
Okay.
That might be different now that I've played it so much and I have a largely different play style than I did when I got into that first run. So I'm still interested. Like I actually just bought Dark Souls 3 from a local game shop. They're having to order it from a different store on the other side of the state. So it's not here yet, but I've paid for it. I'm getting a physical copy probably this week.
Nice.
I'm excited to continue to explore the back catalog there. But I've tried. I actually played like 25 hours of Dark Souls 1 and mostly was enjoying it, but like I found myself stuck through exploration. Like I was not in the spot I was supposed to be and couldn't figure out where I was supposed to be and just kept like spinning my wheels and getting frustrated. So I walked away from it and haven't found my way back in. I think Sekiro was actually the second game that I tried. It was right after I had finished Elden Ring, and it was so different. I was like, this isn't really what I'm looking for right now. I thought it was, but it wasn't. So I haven't been back to that. I tried to give Demon Souls remake a fair shake, but I found it like I didn't even play that many bosses, but it was just like the basic enemies and getting from checkpoint to checkpoint was so much harder than I was expecting it to be that I don't know, I just wasn't feeling it when I tried. Actually, I've like uninstalled it and reinstalled it twice and been like, you know what, I don't think I was fair. I think I'm going to give this. And then like 10 minutes later, I'm like, God damn it, this is why I installed it the first time. And then I walked away from that. So I don't know. And then Bloodborne. So Bloodborne, I tried a few times and like I think I never even picked up the pistol. Like I didn't properly get into the game. I didn't understand what was happening, and then I finally played it and was like, oh, this is actually great. This is what I've been looking for. I did a first run that was like way too fast somehow. It was like 22 hours. I think I just missed a bunch of stuff. I didn't explore very carefully. And I remember saying that and you were like, that's not enough time. I don't think you saw the whole game. And I was like, okay, maybe I should give this another try. So then I got the DLC and I did like a full like 50-hour run of the base game and the DLC. So I did two runs of Bloodborne, which now I really love. And I think has changed the way that I play Elden Ring a little bit. Like I rely a lot more on dodging than blocking. And so that kind of opens my world to a lot of different builds and being comfortable staying up close to bosses and all of that kind of stuff. So I did one full playthrough of Elden Ring, like in around the time of your Elden Ring month. Like I was late getting to it. I didn't get it on release because I didn't know anything about FromSoft then, but there was a ton of hype and I was like, I'll give this a try. And I used all the spirit ashes and NPC summons and like really felt comfortable almost all the time. And the exploration was a huge part of it. Just like kept me engaged. Every time I hit a wall, I was able to bounce and go find something new and interesting. And just, that was like 100 and some hour, 120, 130 hour playthrough. And so it really hooked me in then. I remember coming onto the Discord after beating the Beastmen of Farum Azula, which is like the first easy baby boss you get like 30 minutes into Elden Ring. And I was just like, oh my God, this game is so cool. It's like teaching me to be patient. And I tried this boss 10 times and I finally beat it. And you were like, yeah, man, good for you. Like you were a good sport about it and like sharing in my enthusiasm. I've come a long way since then. And then this year I was hearing rumors of a DLC. And so I was like, well, let me jump back in. And I jumped back in over Christmas break because that's when I have time to play games, is when I'm not teaching. And so I jumped in way too early. I think like the rumors were like, it might drop in February. So I was like, well, let me go ahead. And I'll try to get a playthrough in, or at least one started. And then I'll kind of like limp through it as the semester starts and I'll be ready for the DLC. And so I did a full another 120-hour playthrough from like start to finish with a new different kind of build than I played the first time, just to try out some different stuff. And in the meantime, I had started watching some speedrunners too. And so I was like getting into that community of like speedrunners and challenge runners, really challenge runners more than speedrunners. I'm going to beat the game using only this type of weapon, or I'm going to only level this one stat, or I'm going to do level 1, or I'm not going to block all of this kind of stuff. And I started watching there's this league of challenge runners on YouTube that do bingo. So they play and they randomize different objectives that they make up in the game. And then they like raced to play bingo against each other. So, I got hooked in all of that. And that's the kind of gamer I am too, is like, I get addicted to like one thing. So, sometimes it's Minecraft. It used to be old, like Star Wars MMOs. I've put like 200 consecutive hours into Satisfactory and like played no other games. I just like I get one game and I just kind of like hit it over and over again. So that happened again to Elden Ring starting in December, and I just haven't put it down until the DLC came out.
Nice.
It's one of those like I'm getting stressed / depressed because my workload is crazy and I'm not sure, about a lot of things in life. And so it's like, this is like comfort, it's like putting on The Office because you know what's going to happen. So instead of putting on The Office, I just ran through Elden Ring 8 times.
Nice.
Trying out different builds and stuff.
I've said that in a lot of other places, and I think like people who play a lot of these games understand, but people who don't are like mystified by the idea of From Software games as comfort food or like putting on a warm blanket. But it's really interesting how because, in my opinion, because the things that you're doing in From Software games are so like challenging sometimes, but otherwise memorable. Like you remember every hallway of every dungeon that you go in because you remember like, oh, there's a guy hiding behind this corner. He's going to jump out. So you basically know how everything works. And so I can pick up Dark Souls 1 or Bloodborne and now Elden Ring in certain places. And like getting ready for the DLC, I ran through Stormvale Castle again just for fun. And I was like, I remember all of this because everything is so memorable. Even 2 years later, I come up on a hallway. I'm like, there's a guy right around that corner. I remember this because he bashed me in the head last time. So that comfort and that knowledge of like the spaces that you're going in, even though it's challenging and it can be stressful, that mastery over that brings a lot of comfort, and you have like a lot of control over what's going on in the games, which is not always the case in a lot of stuff. And I think that like having that power or having that mastery over these places brings a lot of comfort. So I'm with you there 100%.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think it's inherent to how the gameplay works, right? Because you're playing it on a loop and not the kind of loop with a roguelite where everything changes on every death. Everything's identical on every death, on every reset. There's like part of the game is memorizing it and figuring out how to most efficiently solve the challenges so that you have more resources left when you get further down the hallway, right? It's like learning to sing all the lyrics to your favorite album. It's like you put it on repeat, you learn to like be one with the art.
Yeah.
And you feel a part of it. And that, yet, like you're saying, like that mastery is so special, but also so comforting.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that we have hit our intro section here. We'll take a little music break, and then we'll come back and we will talk about what's new and what's notable in Shadow of the Erdtree. All right, so Shadow of the Erdtree takes place, if for those unfamiliar, it takes place in the Land of Shadow, which is a cursed land that is actually in the shadow of the Erdtree, hence the title of the DLC. The great golden Erdtree from the base game, you are now in the shadow. This is a banished land. It used to be part of the Lands Between proper, and it was kind of cursed and sent to this lower place. We learn a lot about this place as you go through. I actually think that some combination of having a little bit of familiarity with the story of the base game, plus the way the story is told in the DLC, I came out of this with a better understanding of story and major characters in this than I did in the base game, or frankly, most From Software games. I don't know how you feel. Like, did you come out of this with an understanding of the story? Did you like the story? Yeah. What'd you think?
Yeah. So I think First of all, I'm not great at putting together the like fine details of the story in these games. It's like trying to read a novel that's been broken up into tweets by 70 different people over 4 years. And you
Yes.
just get little sentences of the novel, right?
Mhm.
Which is why the Vadi Vidya, every once in a while he'll show his spreadsheet and it's Pepe Sylvia, right?
Yeah, it's wild.
So I would say the fact that there is a cohesive underlying story written by somebody like George R.R. Martin is like makes every part of it solid. Every part of it feels tangible. Every part of it feels lived in and contributes to the flavor in a really special way. But it's not something that I'm actively following beat by beat.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not designed to be followed beat by beat. But there is something a little bit more streamlined about the story in the DLC because you're following a singular figure.
Yep.
Whereas in the base game, you have this general goal of getting to that big tree over there.
Yeah.
And there's all these players in your way, and you don't really understand how they relate to one another.
Yeah.
I mean, that's maybe similarly true, except that you're following a path that somebody has already laid out, and everybody is referring to that person kind of as you go through.
Yep.
And I think that simplifies it a little bit. Plus, having gone through the base game and watched all the lore videos on it, whether or not I'm very poor on retention. This is like I'm high comprehension, low retention when I watch movies, when I read books. It's just like every time I want to read a sequel to a book, I have to like go read a plot synopsis of something, even if I just finished it. Like I just can't hold on to those. I'm like, who is this person supposed to be? Okay, they were the main character in the last book. Got it. Okay. But having had enough familiarity with the base game, that definitely frames all the stuff you're doing in the DLC and helps you kind of put pieces into place on a puzzle that's already sort of partially assembled, right?
Yeah.
And I think that helps with the comprehension as you go through it rather than all after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. The focus on following in Mikola's footsteps, and because that was the one character that like we probably learned a little bit about in the main game, but not a ton. That was like the big mystery, I guess. And so that's the focus in the DLC. But because you are following in Mikola's footsteps, you'll also learn about people who are closely related to Mikola, like Marika, who's his mother, Melania, who's his sister, and then Radon is a big player in the story here, and then a couple others. But I agree with you that focus on Mikola is really good. And I just think that like we have fewer people involved in the story here. There's a couple new major characters like Mesmer and a couple others I off the top of my head can't remember. But or like the Horn Scent, I don't remember them from the base game. They're a major player in here, but it's like they introduce like 3 new things that you need to really learn about, while giving more context for other people. And when I say like enhancing my understanding of the base game, I have a very broad understanding of the base game. I know like you said, those big bosses that you fight, I know who they are and generally how they relate to each other, but I still don't think I could like write down like, here's a timeline of events of the backstory of Elden Ring. I still couldn't do that.
No.
But like the smaller scope and focus of the DLC really helps me know what I should be focusing on. And so whenever you go to another, site of grace and there's an NPC there and they're talking about Mikola, I'm like, okay, let's learn something about Mikola here. And that only partially helps because there's a bunch of different people with a bunch of different opinions about Mikola. But I thought this was really cool. Like from a story perspective, like I would say I'm at like 60% comprehension right now. And I would say like half of that's from what I put together and half of that is from the Vadi Vidya thing I watched. And then there's a bunch, all the fine details I'm pretty murky on still, but that's fine. I don't need to be an expert on this lore, but I did think this was interesting. Like what we learned in this DLC, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the story there is really neat. I think maybe the one difference between your character's relation to the story between the base game and the DLC is in the base game, I feel like your goal is pretty clear as you're supposed to become Elden Lord.
Yeah.
And in the DLC, like, we didn't even know that the Lands of Shadow existed. I don't know if what Mikola does there affects the Lands Between or vice versa. Like, I don't know if he's trying to become the god of both realms or just the god of one. So the reason to follow him seems less clear. It's like you're trying to figure out your purpose as you go, which is a
Yeah.
little different a way to absorb the story maybe than the base game. So it's a little bit more, I mean, I guess honestly you feel like you're just along for the ride in the
Yeah.
base game too. It's not like your character starts with this motivation origin story where you're like, I have to become Elden Lord for this reason. You're just like, oh, okay, I got to become Elden Lord. Let me just go fight some stuff until that happens. And
Yeah.
that kind of is the way that you interact with the story from a character perspective. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, all FromSoft games. It's like your character just needs to kill everything. But there is a little flavor difference there, I think,
Yeah.
as far as like what's my motivation, you know?
Yeah, it's not until I would say maybe halfway through the DLC when anyone even mentioned that I might be killing Mikola at the end of this. I think it wasn't until you talk with Saint Trina that those words ever came about.
Sure.
Because for the first half of the DLC, every character that you meet fucking loves Mikola, and they call him, Mikola the Kind and Tender Mikola and all of this. And because it's a From Software game, that's not entirely the truth. They do love Mikola, but it's because Mikola has enchanted them. And then once that enchantment is broken, everybody goes back to their original allegiances, basically. And so some keep following him. Some are like, wait, actually, Mikola's my enemy. And so now we have more of like the factions that I guess like more like the base game, I would say. But for the first half of it, you're just kind of like going through learning. You're like, oh, Mikola wants to start a new age of compassion where everybody loves each other, and like the Lands Between could use that. It's a terrible place. So you kind of going along and you're like, well, this doesn't seem too bad. And then you learn like, oh, Mikola's mind controlling everybody to follow him. His age of compassion would be people being nice to each other, but it would be like nobody would have any agency during this entire thing, which is a classic From Software thing to do, like something that sounds nice, but it's actually terrible. And then recontextualizes like that gives you your end goal, we'll say. Like you have a more clear picture of like, okay, well, now I know what's probably going to be waiting for me at the end here. Where, as like you said before that point, you are just kind of interacting with this like you do in another From Software game where it's like, I don't know where I'm going really, but I'm just going to kill everything in the way and things will kind of form as I go.
Yeah.
You do get that purpose eventually. And I like that kind of that switch of showing you that Mikola's not as kind as it may seem.
Yeah, it's well, I don't know what to add to that, but
it's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
You also get backstory on America. You get some backstory on Radon. You get some backstory on Millennia. Main characters, most of them big bosses from the base game, and a little bit of how do I want to say this? Like recontextualizing Moog as a character who was like presented as super evil in the base game, and it turns out he was being mind controlled by Mikola the whole time. And this is not like you learn a lot of backstory, but another thing I thought was cool is this is not a prequel to the main game or something. Like your actions in the main game are referenced in the DLC, and like the fact that you killed Moog in the main game means that Moog's body can be used for a new purpose in the DLC and stuff like that. So I thought like this kind of learning backstory, but actually like being part of an evolving story that never happens in From Software games. You're always doing the archaeology. And in this one, people are like, you did this back then. Now here's what's going on because of what you did, which I thought is cool. Like, again, that never happens.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't have that same experience to draw on for that comparison. But you're right, it is very different. I mean, at least from the base game, where you're just dropped into a situation that is mostly already happened and stable and disrupting it. And here you're part of an evolving story. It's hard to say even like how far behind Mikola you are. It's possible that you're right on his heels, you know, and that as fast as you can go, he's only just gotten his plans kind of gotten into working, you know. So it feels more of the moment in that way.
Yeah, for sure. There is other story stuff that I think is cool. I actually really thought the story about Marika's people. Marika is the queen, the one chosen by the outer god to kind of like receive its will and kind of rule over the lands between. And you learn about where Marika came from and how her people were massacred. And when you go into those jails, her shaman people are the ones inside of those jars being put in there for, I think they said it was some kind of ritual by the horn scent. So that's pretty crazy. And then you learn about how when she rose to power, she used her son Mesmer to lead a genocide against the horn scent as revenge, which is, just cool. Like, I don't normally feel compelled to like read the item descriptions, but there was something about the scope of this that made me read them and pick up on these details here. Like after I beat Mesmer in the boss fight, I immediately read the description in his remembrance to just be like, okay, what's this guy's deal? And it tells you about like what his fake eye was and why breaking that was a big deal in that cutscene. I was like, oh, this is really fucking cool.
Yeah, and they do a good job with the sort of environmental storytelling too. I mean, the getting to go to the shaman village where Marika goes is really kind of incredible. Like the message that helps you figure out how to get there and kind of putting all of those pieces together. And maybe the greatest touch, at least from my perspective, especially because this is a game where I don't really care about the music. The music is, to me, exciting, purposeful, or like serves its purpose well, but also very like not immemorable. It's like there's no melodies that I remember. It's just like fast rhythms and textures that are supposed to get my adrenaline up when I'm fighting a boss. That's kind of how I interact with this music, except for, well, and we can talk about this later, but the music during the Divine Beast Dancing Lion fight.
Yes. Oh,
definitely
so good.
different level. But when you go to the shaman village where Marika is from, and it just plays the little harp plunks from the beginning of like the title screen of the game before it goes into the epic, you know, orchestral, choral, all of that stuff. It's just the simple harp strumming. And it immediately, like, you've heard that sound 7 billion times because it plays every time you open the game, right?
Yeah.
And it's just that, and then it just continues, and it's not followed by the epic bombast, and you're just like, I don't know, it just touches something in you in this game where music, I don't feel like is like memorable and impactful. All of a sudden, a musical moment hits me, and I'm like, holy shit. Yeah, very, very cool moment there for me.
Yeah, I actually think this is one of From Software's strengths tied in with something that's not super memorable. Because I agree with you, a lot of music in From Software games, like they mix it up, but a lot of it is I'm fighting this boss. We're gonna have this heart pounding music that's gonna make me, get nervous during this boss fight. But I don't remember the melodies super well, or in worst cases, like I think some of the Dark Souls 1 music is pretty bad, actually. I don't like it at all. But what they do well is they create memorable moments when music does something different, like what you said, like during the final boss in Dark Souls 1, like during the final boss in Dark Souls 3, they attempted that. And then I think Bloodborne has a lot more like memorable music in there. But anyway, to your point, when you go to that shaman village and it's just that calm music, there's nothing there, there's nothing to fight, there is nobody, all the houses are all boarded up, it's completely empty and abandoned. And then if you read some item descriptions, you learn why it's abandoned, because all the people got dragged away, tortured, shoved in jars, and all of that. There's like just a little tiny, I think it's fake, but a little tiny Erdtree there, just like sending some golden light out into the village. That's from America. And so like those little bits of storytelling, the fact that it's empty after you just had to fight a couple of tree sentinels to get up there, but the fact that that village is empty, is just this light little music, this one lonely little tiny Erdtree. The environmental storytelling there is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like, there were a couple of bosses where I thought the music went really, really crazy and was awesome. You mentioned one, the dancing lion, like when it's jumping up in the air and the music kind of like explodes, for lack of a better term. I'm sure you have better musical terms than I do, but that was the first time I took note of music. And I really like, go ahead with the dancing lion one. Like something about that.
Like you're saying, it's the first time to my memory that there's a musical cue associated with an event in the combat, like a specific event. And I'm not sure, I need to watch this boss more or play it more, because I'm not sure if the first time, if it's, because one of the things they did in this DLC is they kind of messed with where bosses enter their second phase. It's not always at exactly 50% of the health bar. And so for the Divine Beast, it's hard to tell whether it's entering that phase based on a damage threshold or if it even might be based on a musical cue. Like, okay, you've reached this amount of damage threshold, but we're going to wait for the transition until this point of the music comes and we know we can do a smooth transition, because it's going through this kind of like exciting rhythmic stuff. And then when he pops up into the air for that first phase transition, it's the first time you understand that there's there's an elemental switch, right? It's like non-elemental physical stuff. And it switches to lightning for the first time. And it pops up and does this spin. And it's like a big choir moment. There's just like a big consonant chord. There's no dissonance. It's just like glorious, and the texture all of a sudden thins out. So it's not rhythm and rhythm. There's just all of a sudden, and then just one pure chord, right?
Yeah.
And it focuses your attention. I think that's why that moment is so memorable, is because of the stark shift in the music that we don't generally get. It's generally like one thing through the entirety of the battle.
Yeah.
And then that type of moment like happens from time to time after that first one, but I don't think it's as closely aligned. I was thinking that from that point forward, because the phase keeps shifting, right? It goes from lightning to ice. That may be all in the first time you encounter this boss, right? It's like non-elemental and then lightning and then ice and then back and forth between the two, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think and I'd have to look this up or I'd have to like do some more investigating, but I think that it doesn't switch based on damage threshold after that. I think it just is literally tied to the music. So every time it gets to that point of the track, it switches again.
Oh, that'd be super cool if that was the case.
Yeah, it starts to feel diegetic. Like it starts to feel like the music is happening because, okay, the site of grace there is like called before the stage or something about a stage. And this is literally two guys in a traditional Chinese like dancing lion, something you would see at a parade or a circus, right?
Yeah.
It's two performers in this thing, which is why also the boss has such like interesting dynamic movement, because a body couldn't move like that, but two bodies under a blanket could.
Yeah.
Like they're able to do such cool stuff with this boss. I'm just going to gush over this boss for a minute, but I think the music is like the performative aspect of it. I think they really keyed into and played to its fullest extent, which, it was just really fantastic stuff.
Yeah, the musical cues especially, it reminded me of the Ludwig fight in Bloodborne, which is one of the most famous boss encounters tied with changing music in the series, but that one has a cutscene in the middle of it when you go from phase 1 to phase 2, so it's not as smooth as it is here. That one's awesome. Also, this is as good a time as any to mention. Now, I mentioned this in the Discord server, but that time when the lion in the second one, when you fight it in the ruins, when it jumps up and it spews the basilisks out, I laughed out loud. It was a perfect example to me of From Software being extremely funny and having great comedic timing sometimes, where in Dark Souls 1, the basilisks were the scariest enemies because the status effect curse in Dark Souls 1 was a huge fucking deal. Getting cursed in that game was bad news. One of the worst status effects in any game I think I've ever played, because it killed you, but it lowered your maximum HP until you found a very rare item to reverse it. So anyway, fast forward to Elden Ring. We've seen basilisks in Dark Souls 3. We saw them in Elden Ring base game. They're not super scary anymore because the worst they can do is just kill you. But now they're just like, okay, it's been a long time since you saw basilisks. What would be a funny way to throw them out at you? So you have them in the catacombs where it's just the floating basilisk eyes that go down the hallways and give you the death blight status effect. Or this boss jumps up and spews out 5 of them. There's no possible way you could have seen that coming. I thought that was very funny, just along the lines of that dancing lion boss fight.
I had a different experience with that second Divine Beast where I was so angry. It was the 4th of 4 times I used the Mimic Tier in my first run through. In my second playthrough, I soloed everything that I had used the Mimic Tier on, except for this. I didn't even go back. I was like, fuck that boss. I have no reason to go over there.
Yeah.
I'm just going to get frustrated if I do. Peace out.
Yep. That's fair. I mean, I died. I think of all the bosses, I think like, there's not that many that killed me more than 5 times because I use the Mimic Tier and I use other tools and I don't really generally fuck with really difficult fights longer than I need to. So I think this one is probably in the top 5 for most times that I died in a boss fight, just because there's clouds of death blight fucking everywhere.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Interesting. But was there anything else about that dancing lion boss you wanted to talk about?
It was super hard. Like, okay, so it's the first DLC boss that you come up against, the original one.
Yeah.
And when I fought it, I was just like, oh my God, I don't, like, this is going to be super challenging. If this is the first boss, like, what are we in for? You know, it was kind of a wake up moment. And so very much like the base game, and what made me love the base game and what made the base game successful for a lot of people, I feel like, is, well, you get there and you get fucked up and then you go, time to explore. And you just leave that boss for a long time and you go and you find a lot of cool shit and you get upgrades. And then eventually you come back and it becomes a manageable fight. And so I really think they were able to recapture the success of like forcing you into exploration and forcing you to engage with the parts of the game that they knew were going to be successful with this encounter the first time.
Yeah. Those shadow tree fragments are a solution to a kind of unique problem I think they had. So everyone who's going into the DLC, for the most part, is going in with an end game build. You know, like me, level 175. And the way that their stat system works is you can't just like level up all the time because you're going to hit those stat caps. And the returns diminish quite heavily once you get to those stat caps. So they couldn't just like continue on the difficulty curve with the traditional leveling system. So what they did, for anyone who's just listening and has no idea, what they did is they put these items in the world called shadow tree fragments that give you stat bonuses only in the DLC. When you leave, those bonuses disappear. But they're permanent stat bonuses in the DLC. So think of finding however number you need to like level up your shadow tree level. Think of that as like a super level up, and you can get up to level 20, I believe, if you find enough of them. And they also do the same thing with your spirit ashes with items called revered spirit ashes. So by the end, I was at shadow tree level 17 and spirit ash level 9, I think, something like that. So I found a lot of these, and this was their solution for the traditional level cap system problem. This is their solution for people who have this crazy end game build, but they still need to build a challenge for them in the DLC. They say, okay, everyone who goes in the DLC, we're flattening you all down to basically the same level and introducing this new progression system for you. So you're exactly right, Charlie. What happens is they basically mirrored that moment from the base game. When you follow the main path, you get to Margit, you get your shit stomped, and then you're like, okay, I need to go explore. And then 30 hours later of exploring Limgrave, you go back and you kick Margit's ass because you're leveled up. They basically built that into this with this new system. So I think I already know the answer to this for you. This played into my playstyle perfectly because I want to explore more than I want to fight bosses anyway. So I want to be rewarded for exploring. So finding these are great. When you find 2 Shadow Tree fragments, you're like, fuck yes, I'm about to power up big time. But was this like the same experience for you, or was it a bummer that they force you to explore? Because that is what this does.
No, it's absolutely awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, the first way that I like to engage with this game is through exploration. Like,
Yeah, me too.
We haven't gone deep on just how this map works and all of that stuff. We've talked around it, but it's so rewarding constantly. Like the minute by minute, hour by hour rewards of this game when you're not smashing your head against the boss and then ta-da, I did it. Like that lasts for a minute, but getting to every corner of the map and finding something that was near impossible. I mean, literally probably 5 times I could see something on a map. I had a good guess of how I wanted to get there. I went to the exact spot. I even knew I like my first guess was the thing that was the right answer. And it still took me like 5 revisits to find the thing that I knew I was looking for.
Uh-huh.
And then sometimes it's something completely different. It's like, oh, I'm trying to get there. I have to actually go across the map to this other unrelated place, find a cave that I didn't know it was there, and then stake my way under all of the terrain I can see, and then finally pop out to the place that I was looking for. Right? There's so many different cool and interesting and rewarding ways that they present exploration in this game. So, but because of like the sheer amount of items in this game, and one of the issues with the base game, honestly, is like, if you're not one of the players who wants to engage with Spirit Ashes or this other stuff, and half of the game's exploration rewards are tied to that, so eventually it stops becoming interesting. It's like, oh, okay, I did this catacomb and I got something I'm never going to use, and I move on, right?
Yeah.
But the variety of ways that they hid or placed these Shadow Tree fragments and revered Spirit Ashes, which, and by the way, the other thing that's cool about revered Spirit Ashes is it doesn't just level up your summons, it also makes Torrent tankier.
Oh,
so
nice.
If you're having issues with Torrent getting one shot out from under you by a fire golem or whatever, furnace golem, then it's not just that these items are powering up a part of the game you don't engage with. It's tied to something that everyone uses as well, right? So you do use both of them, you engage with both of them. So finding them is always rewarding and always cool, and it's not always done in the same way. Sometimes it's a reward for killing a boss. Sometimes it's at a special altar that you get, like if you're finding a hidden wall or something. Sometimes it's hidden in a basic enemy who's holding a pot on his head that looks like every other enemy, that's just on the side of a field that you'd never find if you weren't trying to go through every corner of the map.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always cool when you find them. I wasn't sure how important they were going to be when I started the game, and I had like probably 10 fragments before I upgraded, because I was like, just like with Spirit Ashes, I was like, I don't know. I want to see what the challenge of the game is like. And a little bit of the Furnace Golem and a little bit of the Divine Beast, and I was like, oh, this game will not work without them. And then as soon as you started leveling up, you're like, okay, now it seems balanced. I see what's happening here. And it was all of a sudden something I was on board with and felt was engaging to all of the ways that I've played it. Even in my fast run, part of it, just like when you're doing a more or less speed run of the base game, part of the fun is like mapping out, okay, I need these items, I need these weapons, I need the most efficient way to get levels. Like I'm not a rune level 1 player. Like I'm not going through with unupgraded equipment and no upgrades to levels. So part of it is finding an optimal path to go and mapping out where those fragments are is part of it, and like ping-ponging your way through the map and getting the most direct line to a boss while as getting as many fragments as you can. Like it makes all of the game engaging, even when you're playing it in like a challenge run mode or whatever.
Right. And that's why, so like, I think one of the criticisms that I've heard of this system is that if you're not an exploration first player, it's kind of the game telling you like you can't play this the way that you want to play it, which I kind of agree with, but also not most, but like probably half of these Shadow Tree fragments are on the main path. Like
Yeah.
they're so prominently displayed because every cross of Mikola has one of these. A couple of bosses give you them. One boss gives you 5 after you beat him.
If you're going just through, let's say if you're just doing remembrance bosses,
Yeah.
which is 10, there's 10 remembrance bosses. If you're just doing 10 remembrance bosses, you can get to Shadow Tree level 11 by the time you get to the final boss, which is more than half. And going just a little bit out of your way, you can get to 14. So
Yeah.
you really, most of them are on that critical path.
Right.
And so I don't think that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, that's the thing that saves it. And so there are people, I have heard people say like, I don't want to explore. I want to just go from boss to boss. And like, you do you, but it's almost along the same lines as the people who are like, I don't want to use spirit ashes. I don't want to use status effects. I don't want to use these other things. This game's too hard. And it's like, well, you're not playing the game that was designed. You're playing a different game. You're trying to play a different game. And that's kind of how I feel about if you just want to like speed run and like ignore what I think is the best part of this game, that it's kind of unfortunate. Like I do get where they're saying like, you have to explore. And if some people don't want to do that, fine, I guess. I can see the gripe a little bit, but also like engage with the whole thing is what I'm saying. You don't have to love exploring, but like the game is telling you that you should go check out these places. You should be curious. And I think this DLC actually rewards you for being curious more than the base game did. Where one of the criticisms about the base game that I 100% agree with is that there are too many caves, too many catacombs that are too similar, with rewards that are less than exciting once you get to the end. Like a lot of the time, the reward for getting to the end of a catacomb in the base game is that you got to the end and you beat the boss and maybe you can level up. You probably got a sword that you can't use with your build, or you got a spirit ash that you'll likely never try. I do get that criticism. And in the DLC here, there are way fewer catacombs. They're all more memorable, and you will find a lot of stuff that's useful in them. And another thing that's different is a lot of those catacombs are not just catacombs. A lot of them will lead you to new secret areas of the map, or not so secret. A lot of them will lead you to giant fucking areas of the map that you saw from a cliff 20 hours ago, and you're like, how am I going to get there? And then you go into a catacomb, and 45 minutes later, you walk out the other side, and you're like, holy shit, I'm here. This is great. So I think that those Shadow Tree fragments, the revered spirit ashes, and making everything, I guess, like there's less to explore, but everything that there is more worthwhile, I think, helps out with a lot of those like warranted criticisms of the base game. There's a little bit too much in the base game, I think.
Yeah. And I think to your earlier point, you're saying, you're trying to play a different game. If you think about the number of hours they spent designing this map and the way that you explore it versus the number of hours that they spent designing and testing the 10 remembrance bosses. The very least, they're probably very similar numbers, if not way more in the exploration.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about game design to say that that's true, but when you just look at the care that was taken, like that's the bread and butter of this game, is the exploration piece of it. Like you need both halves or it's not the same game.
Yeah.
But you're talking about fully excluding half the game if you're not interested in its exploration.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really liked, like you're saying, the catacombs, caves, jails, there are a lot fewer of them, and they feel more unique, more interesting, more rewarding. I love that the rewards are varied in that way. Like you're saying, sometimes the reward is not a weapon or a spear dash, it's access to a quarter of the map.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible.
Yeah.
And two, like, okay, so there's not an underground map to this DLC in the same way that there was in the base game, right? There's not a whole, you can't switch the map mode to underground and see 10 different sites that are underground.
Yeah.
But they've taken that same verticality, that, you know, the awe that you get when you descend into Shofra the first time. And these jails and these caves just go so far, and so, you know, there's these massive underground caverns that are just visual feasts, that like just being in them and walking out of these, you know, into a narrow hallway and out into the expanse that you are not expecting to see is its own reward.
Yeah.
And it happens over and over and over again. One of the most notable examples being the fissure in the south of the Cerulean coast.
Yeah.
When you get to it's called like the stone coffin fissure, I think. And you get to this just expansive area with these giant structures all kind of like collapsed and falling over one another. And you get that same sense of depth and expanse as you do any of the underground maps you saw in the base game.
Yeah, except this time it's not like a literal 1 minute elevator ride down to the lower level. It is, you take a half hour and just constantly go down further and further and further and further until you get all the way down to the bottom eventually, which is where you find St. Trina in this game. But like that was an entire ass dungeon of just going down repeatedly the whole time. Same thing happens in a couple of those jails. Same thing happens in the catacomb that you go down to get to the abyssal woods. It was just you're just like, oh, we're going down again, another elevator taking me down further and further and further. To your point about the way that the map is designed, and you played Dark Souls 1, so you have some familiarity with that. This is the closest they've come to the way Dark Souls 1 was designed, where Dark Souls 1 was like this vertical cylinder of levels stacked on top of each other with connections and elevators leading you back to places. And then you have the offshoots off the side. And then with Dark Souls 2, they went to a real hub and spoke design. Dark Souls 3 is a linear path that you follow. Same with Bloodborne is a bit more of a linear path, but a bit more connections here and there. But they've never gone back to that design of Dark Souls 1. And the From Software fans, like me, I guess, I don't want to project onto everybody, but I've been saying, like, I get why they didn't do Dark Souls 1 again, because it must have been so complicated to design it. But I wish they'd do it again because it's so fucking cool. And then here they come in this DLC. The main game of Elden Ring isn't built like this. The main game is very spread out, and then you have the distinct underground section underneath it. But you don't have that level of verticality and connection that this DLC has. It's like layers and twisting paths that connect with each other, and you'll like come down a place in the Shadow Keep in the northern part of the Shadow Realm, and then that path will take you all the way to like the southern part of the map in a very roundabout way. But that's the way to get there. And like, just thinking about how complex this is, and how many layers are stacked on top of each other, and how like wonderful it is to, like we said before, you get out in the gravesite plain and you look out over, I think it's the eastern cliff, and you see the dragon pit down there. And I was like, there's a big fucking dead dragon down there. I hope I get to go down there. And then 20 hours later, I come out of a cave and I'm like, holy shit, it's that dragon. I'm down here. What is this? Like, this is the way that they designed just the open world, not even talking about the legacy dungeons yet, but just this open world design. I've never played another open world game that's built like this. And it's, I don't know, this is magic. Like, this is a magical design to this.
Yeah, the it kind of boggles the mind when you consider like how draw distance works in games. Like, all of that stuff isn't necessarily loaded, but the fact that you can see basically as far as you want. I've heard anecdotally that there's a concept of this design where, sure, the whole thing might exist on a flat plane, but visually things that are far away from you are like raised up. So it's almost like you're in a bowl so that you can see a lot further than you are, so that you can see things like that might be, too far and it would be over a horizon or something, but it's like raised up so that everything you can see, you can get to. Because if you can't get to it, if it's actually out of the bounds of the map, it's actually just like ocean or something,
Yeah, or just clouds or something. Yeah.
Or cloud, yeah. I feel like you get to those points where you can even see that stuff so infrequently, right? It's like they don't even let you see that very much. Even when you come up close to where you might be at the border, your view is blocked by something else, by a wall or a mountain or a structure or whatever. Like they try as little as possible to show you anything that you can't get to, because if you can see it pretty much, you can get there.
Right. And it's not like I don't know. It's like you've heard that promise in video games for a long time. Like Elder Scrolls games will be like, you see that mountain, you can climb to the top of it. But why would you climb to the top of it? There's not anything there. But but Elden Ring especially has taught us, like, if you see a place that looks, meaningfully designed, like it is a place you're going to be able to go, there's going to be something cool there. Like you want to go there. So when you look over the cliff and you see the giant dead dragon in the dragon pit, you're like, I want to go down there and check out, like, what's the deal with that dragon? I know I'm going to have something to do down there. So it incentivizes you.
And one of the things that they're really great at, it took me a long time to figure this out, but something that I super appreciate now is that the way that they place items in the game are designed to show you those things and entice you and lets you know that something's there, right? The amount of times that you go and pick up something and it's a fucking mushroom and you're like, God damn it, why did I spend the time to pick this up? But you're not there for the mushroom. You're there because the mushroom's on the edge of a cliff, which then when you look over the edge of the cliff, you see a secret area that you didn't know about, and it makes you think, I wonder how I get there, right? The reward is, how do I get there? Like, that is the reward. The mushroom is there to get you to the edge to look at something cool.
Right.
And I appreciate it so much more than I used to.
Yeah. Or the mushroom is there just to give you a vista, because that's another thing I love about this game is, like, again, Elden Ring, the base game, was just such a visually interesting game. When you come into a new area and you get a vista or something like that, it always looked really cool. But they just ratcheted that up. They're like, this is the fucking Shadow Realm. Like, this is just go wild with the art direction. You want to put swirls in the air, like in the atmosphere, fucking go for it. Coming off of the Shadow Tree. Like, so that's another thing that I love is every time you come out to a viewpoint, or like you said, like maybe an item will take you to a cliff edge. What you see over that cliff edge, it might be a cool place that you want to go explore. It might just be like a really cool vista of the Shadow Tree, or making you look back over an area where you've already been, but now you're high up in a castle. Yep. Stuff like that.
Those moments of, holy shit, I came from over there.
Yeah.
Are not to be underestimated. Yeah, really
They're
rewarding.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So many screenshots from my time playing this, and just all the cool overlooks that you see. All right, so that was the first half of the episode about the Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. Just the first half of the discussion. Still to come for the patrons is the discussion about boss fights, the trend in how From Software builds boss fights, the builds that we used, other gameplay things that we found memorable. All of that to come. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can sign up at patreon.com/realdavejackson. For a minimum of $2 per month, you'll be able to hear the rest of this episode. You'll also get a lot of other treats like voting rights for what games I do on the main show, and much more. So with that being said, hope to see you there, but otherwise, tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.